Welcome to Wizard World Virtual Experiences, Popular Culture Psychology. I believe we're on episode 8.
Hey.
Today, we're talking the Handmaid's Tale breakdown, our burning questions. Panelists, who are all of you? I'm going to go in the order that you appear on my screen. Andrea, who are you? What are you known for?
My name is Andrea Frantz, and I'm a doctor of digital media. And what do I know? I know a lot about the First Amendment.
Wind.
Hi, I'm Dr. Wind Goodfreind. I'm a social psychology professor at Buena Vista University in Iowa, and I'm known for writing textbooks and chapters about psychology and popular culture.
Erin.
All right, I am a licensed psychologist from a counseling psychology background. I'm teaching psychology at the University of Portland, the one in Oregon, and I am known for refusing to stay in my lane when I write for the popular culture psychology series, and so I love geeking out about all things psychology.
Ben.
My name is Ben Stover. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor out of Chicago. I am a trauma specialist, and I also work with law enforcement.
Scott, who are you?
I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University. I contribute heavily to the popular psychology series, and I produce a YouTube channel called Dark Loops Productions.
And I am Dr. Travis Langley, distinguished professor of psychology at Henderson State University, best known as the author of the book Batman and Psychology, A Dark and Stormy Night, editor and head nerd of the herd on a dozen other books. I was trying to think which one's most relevant to this. I'm guessing I'm going to go with Wonder Woman Psychology, Lassoing the Truth. Wind in particular, and I have talked about this one before, because Wind has wanted us to talk about The Handmaid's Tale for quite a while now. And a couple of weeks ago, I asked people online, why do they watch? I didn't say, why do you like? I said, why do you watch The Handmaid's Tale? And I got a mix of response. Several people said they tried and they couldn't take it. And a number of people would say they love The Handmaid's Tale. Now, if you've watched The Handmaid's Tale, you know it can be very unpleasant. And we're going to wait till about the last third before we get into this week's new episodes, including the torture porn episode. We'll hold off on those for the latter third or so. So, of course, spoilers on the first 3 seasons.
Right.
Wind, why have you wanted to talk about The Handmaid's Tale?
Did we skip Lindsey on the introductions? Sorry.
Did I skip somebody?
It's okay.
I did it again. Lindsey, who are you?
I'm Dr. Lindsey Wotanis. I'm a multimedia communication professor at Marywood University in Scranton, Pennsylvania, media and journalism expert, and I work a lot with students advising college media.
And Wynn's real reason for pointing that out was buying time to form her answer in her head.
Of course.
I did this with Daniel a couple weeks ago too. This layout. All right, Wynn, why have you wanted to talk about The Handmaid's Tale?
I find this entire world fascinating and extremely relevant to modern culture. As a social psychologist, I think that a character analysis of almost everybody is fascinating. I prefer dystopias because I think that they are warnings for things that we need to be focusing on in our own lives and our own, culture, sort of, that could go wrong if we're not careful. So I think every episode is fascinating, every character is fascinating, and I find it very relevant to current lives.
So any of you, what is it about The Handmaid's Tale that appeals to people?
Gosh, I don't know if I can speak for everybody else. I'm one of those people who, watching a scene of state-sanctioned rape, was very difficult, to the point where I have to ask myself, what am I doing that I'm actually sitting here watching this? What does that reveal about me? This is not entertainment. So for me, who craves those kind of tense experiences to kind of figure things out and look at things differently, I watched it because it was just so to the point and very challenging. So I'm not sure why everybody else watches it, but for me, it was very intense and questioning.
I think I like to. Oh, I like to watch it because it's a fantastic examination of the strength and determination that we see in all of the characters, but in particular when we watch June and we see all that she becomes. So she goes through the classic hero's journey, but it's fascinating to watch her as she grows and develops, and as she has to move through the struggle she does to overcome all of the mental challenges and the physical pain and emotional pain that comes along. And I think for people, accessing her strength is a powerful experience, even though we're watching her be tortured, because she never gives up.
That's a great point. I think for me, in a culture where women are so often pitted against one another, it's really amazing to see a show that shows amazing camaraderie between women and how they work together to do what they do and to kind of fight back in this cruel situation. So that to me is one of the things that I pay real close attention to when I watch.
But of course, they don't always work
Not
together.
always.
I mean, all we have to do is take a look at the relationship between Serena Joy and June to see that there's some serious, some serious push-pull there. But I will say that I became very attracted to this series because I'd read the book so long before. When the book came out, I bought it immediately and was completely changed by it. Oh my God. And when the series came out, the first season truly brought that book to life with the portrayals of the characters. It was just amazing to me.
What do you mean you were completely changed?
It not unlike what Scott just said about how his feelings of discomfort watching this, and what does it say about him? I felt the same way when I read the book. There were a couple of times I had to put the book down and say, I need to walk away from this for a little bit because it's horrifying. And most of the time I go to books for entertainment. And this wasn't, entertaining. It was enlightening.
I think that's a really interesting point about how being a viewer of the show or reading the book might change us and ask us, what would we do if we were in the situation? I think that's one of the key things that I think about when I watch the show, because, a key part of social psychology academically is the idea that personality kind of goes out the window in the crucible of the situation. So we all do whatever the situation requires to survive, and sometimes those are not ideal behaviors. So would we be the brave person? Would we be complicit? Would we, go on the other side for power? So I think a lot of it is thinking about what would we do were we in this situation?
And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to get at, which kind of to take it and twist a little bit, is that even the most dastardly characters, I mean, maybe, not one-off, extras, but any developed character, they're giving them like humanity. It's not a one-sided story. It's so much complexity. And coming from my background, growing up in a conservative church, I know people who feel and think this way, and they're not bad people. They are good, loving fathers and mothers and things like that. And so I do love that it gets me caught up in the complexity of human behavior, of the heroes and the villains.
And the flip side of that is that I don't particularly like June. I think that June does some stuff that is not okay throughout her entire storyline. I mean, the one of the first things we see in the flashbacks is that she has an affair with a married man, right? So no character is all good or all bad.
Yeah, I like shows like this that, as you called them earlier, when dystopians, that put people in contexts they've not experienced before. And what I always end up asking myself, what these shows do for me is, is this narrative we have when we think things are normal, is that actually who we are? You put me in a different context, you leave me there long enough, and I've got a whole new story about who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then you say, what's more real, the context or my story about it, right? And I love the deconstruction of normality that takes place in all these types of shows. And I love it particularly when we see people create new normals. And Gideon is a different type of normal, and the men carry themselves in these ways that are Gideon like. That
Gilead.
Gilead.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's a weird word.
I just said it wrong. So.
So, we broke your train of thought.
No. I was just saying I love the deconstruction of normal, because then the question is, normal is forever contextual. And that's just not a way we experience it. We experience normal as the way it's quote unquote should be, not in a moral sense, but just in a lived sense of this is what happens all the time. When that stops happening all the time, I have this phrase, identity follows circumstance. You change your circumstance and your identity is going to follow. And if you're in a group, you're going to come up with a narrative as to how you're still good, or maybe that narrative no longer applies. So I love to see writers take a stab at how do we redo normal.
I guess some of that ties into some of the things we've talked about, why people are interested in more fantastic dystopians before, especially when we get into our zombie apocalypse analyses. And it's a safer way to mentally rehearse or emotionally practice what would happen. And the closer it gets to potentially real, the more disturbing it is. You can go a little further out. You can look at people, sexually abusing artificial people in Westworld. You're moving a little further along on that uncanny valley in a way. But when you're getting to real people in Handmaid's Tale, that's when it gets harder to separate your emotions. But it's still what you think of as not the real world. So one of the things when Atwood, what was it, 85 when she wrote the first book? And at first there is a sequel. Not everybody knows there was a sequel. But when she did the book in 85, we were further away, but she still had concerns like, in human nature, there are people who would like to do these things. And we've become more aware that, there are still people who would like to have exactly this kind of world.
I read an interview once with Atwood, and she was asked why did she, because she's Canadian, right? Why did she set this, The Handmaid's Tale in the United States? And her response was because she said she felt she could see it actually happen here.
When you had something?
I really like Andrea's point. I was just going to say, in terms of the motives of the people on the show, I think another point of social psychology is we all do stuff it's really not okay, and then we use rationalization and self-justification to say, well, our motive was good, or it was for the greater good, so we justify stuff that we know really isn't okay and might be victimizing someone else because it benefits us, and then we twist it in our heads to say, well, they deserved it, or it's a long-term good thing. And there's a lot of that in this show.
Now we do have a viewer question. She's referring to something from more recent episodes, but let's talk more broadly because we can be more specific about this character later. What are your thoughts about the things June has pushed other people to do over the course of time? She's very good at manipulating people sometimes.
And there's a lot of that in the most recent season. So
yes,
there
is.
But she's been doing it along the way.
True.
And she's done it progressively more. Ben, what?
Just say June has gotten. We have to remember with June is on mostly a singular mission to get her child back, and then is also driven significantly by tearing down the things that come in her way along the way. But her primary goal has never deviated from getting her child back, and she will take down anything and everyone in her way that manipulates that goal. And I think she is very, very aware of that and will trade your life for someone else's.
That's right. She'll kill a whole town if it saves her own daughter. I mean, the morality of that is questionable.
I mean, think about when she pushed Mrs. Lawrence to walk with her and take the subway to Hannah's school, right? And they took that journey, even though Mrs. Lawrence is unstable, not well, could physically probably shouldn't be doing this, is sure as hell not in good shoes, right? And she does it anyway, and it doesn't matter. She feels a little bit guilty though when Mrs. Lawrence has a meltdown, but it's all for the greater good to get to Hannah.
Except that she lets her die. So
Eventually, yes. Yes.
Well, I think part of explaining why she does what she does is the contextualization she's put in. For me, one of the most jarring narrative moments was early on in the series when I think diplomats from, I want to say, South America came, and she went up to, hey, we've got women, can you help us get it out? Because she was speaking with a woman. The next thing you know, they came to buy women. That would narratively blew me away, and I'm sure it just destroyed any idea of how the heck to get out of here June may have had. And I think when you continually do that to a character, you're just breaking it down into what am I going to do? And I love the season 3 finale where she's figuring out, do I shoot this man or not? And she figures out a way to draw the guns away from everyone else. And then she didn't have to, but she did. And I, right or wrong, I just love the narrative brute force of putting someone in that space and simulating what they would do. So, yeah.
When that ambassador came up, you're feeling for this person, and you're hearing her when she's saying, but, we haven't had a child survive in our area for 6 years. You hear her pain. She was coming there, and she liked the things she was hearing when she was being fed the lies. It was looking for a rationalization, justification for the things they wanted to do. Because I know Erin wanted to bring up the issue of cognitive dissonance. So I guess explaining it to the audience in a simple way, that term gets used a lot recently, and usually incorrectly, but 1/3 of the time it's used right. You have two inconsistent thoughts, or your actions are inconsistent with your thoughts. And as long as you don't realize you're being a hypocrite, you don't have stress over it. But when you're aware that there's this hypocrisy, that there's this conflict, you got to adjust one or the other in order to relieve that sense of dissonance. And this is a woman who, when June is telling her the truth, must be experiencing very strong dissonance, because she wants to feel for June as a human being, and she has her people, her country to look out for. So she's got a serious conflict there within herself. At that moment, we see her in a state of cognitive dissonance. We don't see how she resolves it, except that most likely she's going to change the attitude to match the action, because that's what people tend to do in cognitive dissonance studies.
Probably something on the order of like, oh, she's just a one-off, everybody else is probably fine. She's just a malcontent. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of that. There are so many characters, and you can watch them all evolve in that way. And you can kind of see their little turn posts of when they change in light of these moments where I have to go with my values. That is X. I'm all about you can talk about Aunt Lydia until the cows come home. I love these girls. They're my wards. I protect them, and I've got all of these things. And I'm also trying to bring about this new godly land. And now I'm also watching these girls being tortured and hurt, and I'm kind of being forced to be complicit in it. And some of this godliness isn't actually godly, and and watching a lot these characters struggle with just constantly being faced with these tensions of idea X and idea Y are just completely opposite to each other.
You mentioned Aunt Lydia. I think there's somebody who has a whole lot of cognitive dissonance at certain times. What do y'all think of Aunt Lydia?
I think the character is fantastic. I think we talk about it as cognitive dissonance. I think more and more data are showing that humans actually emotionally resonate to each other rather naturally. In other words, we watch movies because we see emotion. It puts us in that emotion state. And I think quite often when when we have conflicting emotions, we create a sort of cognitive rhetoric for ourselves that converts the dissonance to virtue, but we never consciously experience the other side of it. We just, oh, well, I did this for everyone. We don't know why, we don't unconsciously, we know why we said it, right? But her, methinks she doth protest too much, her love contains all of the dissonance, right? It's all there. It's not unguilt laden. I'll just leave it at that.
Her backstory is such an interesting, when they do flashbacks to her life, but the story in which she sort of saves the child from the mother who is wayward when she's a teacher. That story to me just said, all Lydia really wants is unconditional love. Mm. And she has managed not to find it for the most part. And I think she wants to put forward this unconditional love and nurturing to these women, and, plucking out their eyes somehow doesn't necessarily compute as anything other than just any sort of parental discipline that you might otherwise be meting out, because that's required of the situation.
Spare the rod, spoil the child. Yeah.
There you go.
A couple things from our viewers. Andy Z remarks, I've not had a show give me so much anxiety since Game of Thrones. And adds, Aunt Lydia terrifies me. I don't know what to make of her. Asher Johnson, who would have joined us, except I didn't want the men to have the same number as women on the panel. That's just me. I didn't think this was the topic where I thought the women needed to outnumber the men on this particular topic. But Dr. Asher Johnson, who's joined us many times on these panels, says, it seems as though Aunt Lydia accepted the new reality and would rather put herself in that horrendous position than someone who'd be less concerned for these women. Andy Z, actually, let me go back to a comment that just moved off my screen from Kuroneko Cake. Comments, there is comfort in dystopia. The stories, I believe. I am a cyberpunk gal, and a part of me hopes these externalized atrocities give people ability to change, because the problem is not personality paired with the reader's viewer, and there's less guilt through these dystopian stories. And then Andy Z has a question. Why do you think Hannah? We're getting into. Let's see. We're far enough along. We're about to touch on some. We got to touch on this last three episodes because people have some questions related to those. Andy Z asks, why do you think Hannah was afraid of June? Are they brainwashing Hannah to turn against her mother?
Seems that way.
Yes.
That's what I assumed when I saw it. I mean, she clearly has this kind of like visceral reaction. I'm sure they're telling her all sorts of horrible things, and she may have overheard the news in Gilead, which is clearly anti-June.
And face it, June didn't really look all that good right there. That would be a little scary.
True.
She did not. And also, Hannah knows that she's a handmaid, and Hannah has encountered other handmaids around throughout society and knows how they're regarded in all of the words that they are referred to, and especially the less than choice ones, such as whores and other such terms that they use to other them. But we see Hannah's encountered that, and she's going to know that mom is that. And I think we got a really interesting look at the flip side of that with the other little boy who's with his aunt in Canada. And I don't think that was an accident. We saw them going, that's not your mom. Those weren't your parents. But the kid identifies those as his parents. And I think the same thing is going to be happening to Hannah. And she's been with them for quite a while now, being cared for well and living a decent life, not in constant danger.
And that happens in real life. We know there are kids who get separated from parents. And I'm not just talking in the last 5 years, but yes, of course, we are talking the last 5 years too. So there are kids who get separated from parents. Some, it may be because the parents were neglectful or abusive, but it may have happened so early that child doesn't remember it, doesn't remember the circumstances. Or it may have been through no fault of their parents at all. But then you have the parents they know, the adoptive parents who, may have been carefully selected, or they may be foster parents who were wonderful people, or foster parents who were terrible people. Somebody who had been a social services caseworker, I know there's a range on the quality of foster parents. So these kids have the people they've known. And we all know, you look at the list of stress factors, the one theme across that entire list is change. Change and the unfamiliar are scary, regardless of what they are. And the idea of reconnecting with June is an unknown. And now adoptive mom has had some time to more actively poison her against June, especially after the second time June saw her.
Hannah probably assumes June is there to take her away from her family and take her to Canada like the other 86 children, and she's not ready for that.
Well, and also when you consider every time she's seen her, I mean, she's in a glass box. It's always been in this horrifically traumatic scenario. It's creepy, it's dark, it's cold. Now she's in a glass box. Like, it hasn't been some happy reunions of the times that she's seen her since she got ripped out of her arms.
And we never quite see what the state sanctioned punishments are to children, but we can assume that the children have been indoctrinated in the society and are aware of how brutal the punishments are when you step out of line.
I mean, my guess is that they would walk by the hanging wall too at some point or another. Can't really avoid it.
I've got a comment. I'm just not sure about reading this, so I'm not going to. But I'll thank the person who complimented our panelist. I'll tell y'all later what this is about. Ben, you are a trauma expert. You are a therapist. You counsel people. You deal with trauma and grief. Do you see realistic depictions of people's reactions to trauma throughout the series?
Yes, I absolutely see realistic depictions of trauma throughout the series. In particular, what I see is the acting by Elizabeth Moss, in particular in the most recent season, is she does a beautiful job of not only facially acting, but through her entire being that she takes on, is she shows the difference in when people rotate through the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn responses, and also when they dissociate, because she leaves her body and leaves the situation at times. And what I treat usually is when I see people after the fact. What we're seeing is this ongoing situation, in which case it's not appropriate to begin trauma treatment because you want to work with people on surviving, if that's where you're encountering them. And in this, we see excellent depictions of June rotating through whatever she thinks or her body decides that she needs to survive, and she can very quickly snap from fight to fawn. And we see her do that in what Dr. Langley called the torture porn episode, when they have her fingernail in a vise and are about to rip it off. She switches to fawn so fast. And that is almost always how she manipulates Aunt Lydia, is by fawning. And for those that aren't familiar, the term fawning is when we acquiesce to the demands and expectations of our captor in order to feign or actually comply in order for survival.
Yeah, in that case, it was a feign. Where once she says first, we don't know at first. We don't know, is she actually complying or pretending to comply, until she gives her answer, and then we know, oh, she's still stalling, she's still manipulating them. Mayday mods, what do you think is the most important message theme the story is trying to tell? Is it about family, sex, LGBTQ, politics?
Politics. And I'm going to jump in there just because for me, this is the great cautionary tale that Atwood told in the book, and that this series is continuing through. It's this great cautionary tale about what happens when a theocracy takes place, and the very first things to go are the First Amendment rights that are guaranteed in our Constitution. So the right to free speech, freedom of religion, there's some irony here, but it works. Free press, the death of the Globe is the best example of that. Right to petition, right to assembly. All of those things are stripped, and they dehumanize all of the people without power in this community. So for me, it's very political.
Yeah, theocracy does not actually allow freedom of religion.
No, it
And
does not.
no, it does not.
That's the point.
It'll have state religion.
Right, exactly. So, yeah.
Well, you and Lindsey both wanted to talk about the First Amendment issues, and while we're a bunch of psychologists, but we bring in other people too, because our feeling is, gosh, if people can talk about it, it is psychological. What is it you two wanted to say about the First Amendment issues related to this show or the books?
Lindsey, go ahead first.
Yeah, don't be polite.
Sure.
Jump in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, for me, what's fascinating as they're taking away these rights and the people's ability to communicate, they're imposing a whole new system, right, of ways to communicate. And we see that through the language that they use. Praise be, blessed be the fruit. They have this whole system that they have to use, right, or threat of punishment if they do not comply with that. And so, there's a lot of theories of communication that say, James Carey, he says that all communication is ritual, right? That it's not about conveying information. We don't communicate to convey information. We can communicate to share beliefs, maintain society over time. And this show is a perfect example of how you can use communication systems to create, maintain a change, a society very effectively to your will.
And to that end, I would say the whole concept of the freedom of speech is undermined completely by the expectation of conformity to what you're talking about, Lindsey.
Yeah.
That if you don't conform to that, if you don't respond, and there are a couple of times that June doesn't, someone will say, under his eye or whatever, or blessed day, and she'll say, she has this smart retort like, and it's so clear that she is exercising in that just small response. I'm gonna speak freely, sort of, as best I can without getting killed. And it's absolutely a fascinating commentary on free speech for me.
And I think,
and of course, the masks, especially once we get to Washington, D.C. In the series, and they ultimately literally muzzle the Handmaid's Tales with the ring, the handmaids with the rings in their lips. That too is just an incredible statement on the power of free speech if you have it.
Well, the other thing that I love too about this show is how there are still so many underground ways that the women communicate with one another. Nonverbal communication is just so powerful, and they do it so well in this show through June's acting, but through all of the handmaids. And in the very last episode, or was it the second episode of season 4, when they talk about how they learned to do that. They learned to communicate with their eyes, with reading lips in the Red Center when they were first captured. And that is what has enabled them to get as far as they have gotten. Violence is another mode of communication, right, in the show. So there's just so many different ways to look at the way they use communication to means to an end, right? All the characters.
I was going to say that when a group is trying to oppress another, ironically, they will dehumanize the other and take away First Amendment rights in the name of keeping us safe from the other, while we're simultaneously losing our own rights, right? I mean, this is I'm not even going to give it a name. This is just how this plays out. And there's got to be a mathematical relationship between the degree of hyperbole in the othering and the degree of simplicity in the view that you're trying to get a group to live by. It's pretty stunning, and they did a great job on the show.
That's a classic Atwood line of there's freedom to and freedom from.
Yep.
And the justification of this is all for your safety.
But it's no more exemplified better than in the transformation of Serena, right? And how she is so into the world and this, what they've created. And when she starts to realize how oppressed she actually is through the system that she created, she has this moment of, well, I mean, I don't know, does she ever really awaken? But she right. You see moments, like glimpses, where maybe she's gonna like wise up to this and realize, gee, like look what I have done and what I lost in the process.
there's so much irony in the fact that she truly is the person who created this. You know, she is the architect of Gilead, and in the process has simultaneously lost every right to her own speech and her own power in this society. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
And the power that comes with communication. You know, the idea that they are not allowed to read or write. The women aren't. Any of the women, right? So who gets to have knowledge? Who equals who gets to have an opinion, right? And so this idea that it wasn't even just the handmaids who were having to find other ways to communicate. And the other just tidbit I wanted to toss in there of just like the communication that is all the hangings. I mean, that's a pretty clear message right there.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of comments from different people. Some have to do with things we were saying earlier. Like Emily Bain asking, wasn't the last time Hannah saw her mom was when she had snuck into the people who had Hannah's house? Okay. So maybe she just remembers how scary that was. Whitney Weston weighs in with about dystopias in general. It bothers me a bit that people like them so much. They're supposed to be warnings, but people don't heed them, do they? Does the future have to suck? Could we build the Federation? Could we build the Planetary Union? Thoughts from the panel. Why can't we build a utopia? And sometimes the reply is because people aren't like that.
Well,
utopias are usually.
Go ahead.
Sorry, isn't it the line better? Like, we want to make a better world, but better for who? Better is not always better for everyone, right? And that's like one of the things that they emphasize in the show. So utopia, dystopia, is there such a thing as utopia?
I mean,
And that's the thing.
The literal translation of the word utopia is nowhere.
Can't hear you very well, Wind.
I was saying the literal translation of the word utopia is nowhere.
Is nowhere? Is that what you said?
That's my understanding.
And I would argue that what is the definition of utopia, right? I mean, any complex system is going to have conflict. We can go into the philosophy of that if you want, but stability is not something that exists in the natural world for free. Stability requires work and energy. And even my body has to destroy a lot of stuff in order to stay a complete body. So when we talk about utopia as conflict free, I think that's when we actually make ourselves more vulnerable to the things we're seeing in dystopian narratives. These dystopian narratives keep us woke about what, as Wynn said, what could happen. And it's not that we want to go there. It's just that we want to have this intense, sustained, continued conversation about what it means to be us and what we do to stay that. And a lot of people get hurt by us being who we are. And, if we don't talk about it, then we just collapse into the rhetoric of it's for the good, right? And you don't critically look at it.
No, we're already coming up on the hour. I do want to put this in mind for people to just keep in mind. We started at a quarter after because of the previous panel and technical issues, but we do need to be starting to wind down. What were you saying, Andrea?
No, I was just going to say, if you think a little bit about really what a dystopia is, it's commentary about the human condition, right? And the human condition is inherently so complex. And, to that end, I think we're attracted to dystopias because we want to better understand the human condition. Yeah, I think that's.
I really appreciate that. I'm sorry, Andrea, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Go for it.
I appreciate the comment from the audience because it's true that, we kind of have this sort of voyeuristic enjoyment of the dystopias, but do we really learn the lessons is a good question, because just as one example, we see these women who have been oppressed and living this horrible lifestyle. They're immigrating to Canada as refugees. They're treated fantastically. Are we doing the same thing in our country? Good question. So are we making sure to ensure the rights of women in our country? So it's a good thing to consider.
There have been times when they were describing how the government overthrown and it made me think of what happened, the attempt earlier this year, the insurrection, and it just really, really stands out when you think about the fact that they were writing that stuff before that happened.
Yeah, we've been living in the prequel for 5 years. I mean, longer to be
agree.
honest. Longer to be honest. I mean, even American democracy was founded on a lot of people having nothing to say about what this supposedly democratic, free speech driven space was going to do. So what I've been seeing is a destabilization of what I'll just call whiteness, whatever you want to call it, a destabilization of a centralized power structure in the culture that gets to dictate who says what. And as that destabilization continues, we're going to see more and more stories like this. And we're going to keep asking ourselves, what's normal? What's not normal? What should we do? And in the end, I'm going to ask ourselves, maybe this plurocracy is what we're after. Maybe having this space of difference, and having people have identities that can just be different within themselves is hopefully where I think this genre is leading us. But man, it's a long haul. It's a long haul.
And I think that's one of the things that I like, again, back to that idea of the complexity of like, no, this is not something we can just magically solve in a season or a half an hour or whatever. It's gonna be a haul.
Well, the showrunner said he's got a 10-year plan, which, okay, I can definitely see it, because it's even hard to, how do you fix society even 10 years? But, I want an idea that something's going to be accomplished, while Hulu is definitely still running the show. So,
well, I will just quickly add to that as this kind of conversation continues to be forefronted in culture, younger people will be raised in a different space than they were 30 years ago. Their approach to diversity is going to be much different than the context I was raised in. And I do think we come into the world emotionally first and cognitively second. And I think as kids bring their emotions to the world, and then this is the cognitive structure that they're wrapping around it, these are going to be different people. At least that's my hope and my assumption, is that we just continue this work and it changes the world they get raised in.
I love the hope in that viewpoint, Scott, but I will also note that young people are also being raised in a society right now where, I mean, we're still fighting about who has the right to take center stage and to be heard in this country. We're still fighting about that. And young people are hearing that on a daily basis as well. And they too see the evidence of white supremacy out there on a daily basis. So I love the idea of the hope behind what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think there's at least a 10-year run here.
At least. It's a generational phenomenon,
At least.
Etienne Bland asked a good question that might be one for us to, we could take a while on this, but to start heading toward wrapping up. Do you guys have a favorite episode or a story arc that you feel defines the show? That's also when you have to think through the whole run of it. For me, it's a lot of moments. There are moments I really love in the show.
I agree with that, Travis. My favorite moment of the entire show is when June is holding out the rock and drops it and refuses to stone her sister. I mean, her metaphorical sister. It shows the resistance. It shows, we're all in this together. That for me was a pivotal moment.
For me, it was the ambassador moment. Every expectation that I brought to the show was violated and destroyed. And it's like, damn, this is okay. That's about me. That's not about the show. That's about me. And it's like, when a show can do that to me, bring it on. That's what I'm after. Yeah.
Andrea?
I'll say that I think that my favorite episode was Unwomen, which was in the second season. And that was the season that was the episode June has run away. She's at the Boston Globe and she's discovering sort of the death of the press, the death of the ideas of freedom and the voices. And she was very focused on the discarded shoe. the obviously a person at the Globe who had been killed. And ultimately she takes that shoe and she creates that sort of memorial at what looks as though it was the firing squad wall. And that shoe becomes this sort of centerpiece of hope for her. And for me, that really stuck with me as this moment where, okay, we're going to find what we can to hold on to keep pushing forward.
I think for me, one of the things, there's so many moments that are so good to talk about. I think the one that sticks out for me right now, and maybe it's because of what happened in January, was the scene where the death of the American way was shown, not so much with the assault they did on the Capitol, but when the two men with the machine guns are mowing down the crowd. The crowd is standing there doing their free speech and they're protesting and they're expressing their displeasure, but no one's came to this armed. This isn't a revolution, but this is Americans standing up in the way that they are taught. We are lawfully allowed to assemble, and the Gilead soldiers are armed with 100-round magazine machine guns and just start indiscriminately firing into the crowd. I think for me, that one stuck out a lot outside of anything like with June in particular, overcoming trauma, was that watching that whole crowd lose their identity simultaneously.
Okay, and that pause, I think we're out of the moments there. And there's so many more things. Oh, Erin has one. Okay, yes.
So I'm going to just flip the emotion on that specifically because I was just reliving some of the best moments of the episodes at the beginning of this season and watching all of those kids get off that plane. The idea that like we muck through, I love the show, but we muck through so much pain and torture and trauma and all of this kind of stuff. But the idea that even through all of that, it's still possible to do amazing, miraculous, beautiful things. So watching those, that when they go in and they see all those kids and then you see Moira's face of like, oh God, she did it. That was my favorite.
The little girl, the one who is essentially the child who speaks. I think her name was Rebecca. When she sees her dad and runs to him, it's like, okay, that's going to get me. That gets me hard. So we're going to keep talking. And if we go long enough, we may just let Wizard use this for our slot next week. But in the meantime, where can everybody find all of you online? Andrea?
On Twitter, I'm Andrea Frantz 221.
Wind.
That's Goodfreind on Twitter.
Erin.
At my psych geek on Twitter.
Lindsey.
At Lindsey Wotanis.
Ben.
You can find me and my podcast mates, which I forgot to mention. I run the Popcorn Psychology podcast, where we talk about pop culture and film and psychological phenomena we see in them. And you can find us at popcorn_psych on Twitter or Popcorn Psychology on Facebook.
Scott?
You can find me on Twitter at dark_loops, and you can find me on YouTube at the Dark Loops Productions page.
And I'm easy to find: Twitter, Facebook, Amazon. Just look for Travis Langley. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate all these comments. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody. May be able to fit some into the later discussion, but for now, bye.